What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersiaholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my faction overview series for the divided Impera over 1 for Total War Rome 2. Today we are checking out the Odrysian Kingdom. That's right, we're heading back over to Thracia now. We haven't done any faction around here for quite a while now, the last one being the Getae. So that was a long time ago now, at least it feels like it. Anyway, today we'll be checking out the Odrysians in the usual manner. I'm not really sure on what faction to do next though, so please do comment down below your suggestions. There is a bunch of factions I want to do, but I'm trying to avoid because I know that they'll be getting changes in the upcoming update. Some of those include Massalia, Archbosporus, the Arabic factions such as Nabateh and the Saba. A bunch of other factions are getting a few new units, some are getting just a couple, some are getting quite a few, so I'm trying to hold off on them, but any kind of suggestions does help me out. We are starting to get towards the tail end of this series though, so it won't be too much longer until we're done with the faction overviews. Incredible to say, as there is over 40 playable factions in all of Divided Impera, at least for the grand campaign. There are other campaigns we could cover, so perhaps that's another series in the future, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, let's jump into talking about the Odrysian Kingdom. Alrighty, so let's start with the buffs and debuffs. You start off with the Distinct Peoples buff, which gives you +2 public order from the Dacia, Thracian, and Illyrian culture. Basically, just giving you 2 public order in general. Not a massive boost, but it is a nice little boost, and when you're trying to min-max or if you're playing on the hard difficulties, this will help you try to stabilize things a little bit more. But then we come to the Civilized Savages buff, a whopping -50% building conversion costs. This is actually really powerful, and I think it's a very nice perk to have if you are playing as the Odrysians, because once you expand out of Thracia, that's where you're going to be encountering a lot of quote-unquote civilized factions such as the Greeks, the Romans, the Far Easterners, all kinds of different types of factions. So you'll have to convert their buildings to your own, and it's something that's often overlooked quite a lot in DEI, I feel like, where people don't realize that when you take a new province or a new city, it actually can be quite a lot of work to keep it, which is why in, say, my Parthian campaign, instead of trying to occupy all the territory I took, I just liberated it because it wasn't worth the cost, it wasn't worth the investment. But here for the Odrysians, a whopping -50% to that cost, that is massive, and it's going to probably help you be a little bit more convinced to occupy settlements, especially in new cultural areas. Then we go down to the Odrysian specific buffs. So you share those other 2 buffs with the RDI and the Getae. Now we go down to the Odrysian specific buffs, and they have the Hellenic Peers buff, which gives increased public order from Hellenic culture. This is really nice actually, because a lot of the cities you'll be taking, especially to your south, will be of Greek culture majority, so that's massively helpful too. Very nice buff to have for the early to mid game, not so much the late. You shouldn't really need it then. And then you have the Night Marchers buff, which gives you increased morale at night time. Not a massive deal, but it could be very helpful, especially when you're fighting against high morale armies like the Romans, for example, or the elite tier units of the Greeks. Other barbarian factions usually have pretty low morale, so I wouldn't bother trying to use it too much, but it could actually be very beneficial for you to try and get those night battles, not even just for the sake of cutting off reinforcements from the enemy, but for actually giving you that morale edge to get you on par, or at least closer to the elite legionaries of the Roman army. And then the debuff you have to suffer is the Separatist Tendencies debuff, which reduces your party loyalty, which is a little bit of a bummer. We'll see just how much it is when we get to the campaign overview section of the video. However, the main issue with this is that this is combined with you being a chiefdom, and when you're basically just a tribe, you have a automatic -5 loyalty to all of your political parties, so which is always scary, especially on the higher difficulties. It can be difficult to manage if you don't know how to min-max the system, so do be aware. If you get a bad dice roll and you have some very annoying political parties to deal with, they might not be very loyal. But anyway, now let's jump into the part 1 section of this video. We'll check out the grand campaign for the Odrysian Kingdom. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the campaign overview for the Odrysian Kingdom. Here we are at the capital of the Odrysians, which is, of course, Odessos. You have one army with your general, which is actually your king, and then you have three extra units in addition to your general. Not terrible. You do have some decent cavalry here, but yeah, you might want to start upgrading as quickly as you can. Well, for whatever reason, by the way, this unit card always shows up for me on turn 1 in my multiple test campaigns I've done with these guys. The Thracian late run fire warriors are not available to you straight on. It's just a little bit of a unit UI bug, that's all. So don't get your hopes up about that. They come later on in the campaign. You have that one army, you have one spy, and no navies. That's why I mixed up spy with navy. That's all you have. You start off really, really small. You only have this small little settlement. It's a coastal settlement, so that's nice, but you are, again, let me sing it from the rooftops, a one-hitter quitter. One-hitter quitter, that's right. You get hit hard, they take out Odessos, and it is GG, it's game over. A lot of factions start off like this, especially the barbarian factions. Feels bad, man, for them. There's almost like no barbarians that have more than one city at the beginning of the game, but then I guess it depends on your point of view on who is a barbarian and who isn't really, right? So you start off with the city of Odessos. It has trained slaves inside of the settlement, so that is very nice for you. It's a very rare resource. Only a couple of them are available on the map, so you'll be definitely wanting to get that upgraded as soon as you can. You get it from your core settlement, by the way. Can I show you right here? Yes. Wait, where is it? There it is. 10 trained slaves. 10 trained slaves. That's what you get. So you don't necessarily have to like expand your city and then build a slave import market. You can. It'll give you extra income and whatnot. But it's up to you. Just keep that in mind. You don't have to, or you might want to wait until you take more territory in the same region just to get more food and stuff for your people. But anyway, this is your starting position. You are part of the Thrace province. So you have actually a fairly sizable province here. You have Amphia to the southeast, which is part of your fellow Thracians. To your west, you have Nasos, which is way far to the west. But this city over here is quite valuable because it actually has silver and lead. Very valuable city. I would recommend you try and conquer all of this province, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then we have Pulpadeva, which is the capital of your home province of Thrace, and that is it. All here, fairly close together. It's a pretty solid province. Pulpadeva is actually a really secure city. It only has 3 primary approaches, all of which have plenty of forest cover that will allow you to set up ambushes. So, without getting too much into the tips and recommendations and stuff, the one thing I would definitely recommend is taking Pulpadeva and making it your capital ASAP. It could be a very useful city for you, very defendable, especially from the pesky Greeks, who are probably just like 2 turns away max. So I would definitely recommend you check that out. It's going to be a lot more defendable for you. But anyway, let's check out your diplomacy. So your diplomacy, in my opinion, is one of the biggest factors for this campaign. Generally, diplomacy is pretty neutral. You get to do whatever you want, and that's kind of where it is. The Odrysians, things are a little bit different. Now, as I scroll up and down here, you'll see a lot of yellow. Yellow meaning neutral, usually. At least that's what it says. But just because a faction is neutral does not mean that they're willing to trade with you just because another neutral faction is willing. There's other more complicated factors that come into account that aren't necessarily showed in the UI. But the main thing to understand for the Odrysians is that you are in an absolutely melting pot of cultures. To your south down here, you have the Greeks. To your east, you have a mixture of Greeks, Anatolians, Caucasian factions even further east. You have other Thracians next to you. To your northeast, you have the nomadic factions and more Greeks. They're friggin' everywhere, the Greeks, I swear. To your northwest, you have more barbarians who are part of the nomadic factions, more Thracians and Dacians. It kind of just continues, but once you get past Dacia and keep going northwest to Pannonia, you have Celts. And then once you get past them, you have Latins, and then you have Germans. So basically, in every direction you expand, after you conquer a province or so, you're going to be encountering new cultures. Now, a new culture doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be hostile towards you. However, in my experience in testing this campaign, a lot of the time it does. Now, as a general statement, it's not absolutely specific, and you can game the system to make diplomacy fairly easy, especially on normal difficulty. But in my opinion, from what I've seen, the nomads will not like you, the Greeks will not like you, and only about half of the Dacian Thracians will like you and be willing to do diplomacy with you. That's what I've found, and the very frustrating thing I've found for my campaigns is that it's your immediate neighbors that are the ones willing to do diplomatic relations with you, such as the Finni, the Talisto Boggii, and then the Trebali to your west. Which is very annoying because most of them are Thracians. The only ones that aren't are the Tolistoi. I'll just go with that. The Tollies. Tolly, mate. We'll go with the Tollies. These guys are Celtic. So you can declare war on them without too much issue. But the Finni and the Trebali, the main issue with that they are the ones that want to do diplomatic relations with you, is that they are the ones that are in your way. They own cities in Thrace, cities that you're going to want to take. Taking Anthea, while it's only a tiny little fishing village, is actually quite important, so it lets you see what is coming from the west or coming from the east. It's actually a very powerful settlement, despite it having no real tangible resource. The main benefit of holding it is a strategical position, I feel like, anyway. That's just my opinion. So that's very annoying. You're really going to struggle early on with diplomacy if you're careless with it. If you manipulate things a little bit more, you might have some better chances of it. But generally speaking, the nomads will dislike you, and they'll be coming in from this direction up in the north. And then the Greeks, who are also to the north and to the east, and down here to the southwest, generally don't like you and won't want to help you out. So how do you deal with this issue? That, in my opinion, warrants a video entirely on its own on how to handle diplomacy. However, as a generally broad statement, very much keep in mind who you're going to declare war on. Try to declare war on people that are fighting your allies or that your allies dislike at the very least. It's not really too hard to game the system, it's just something you need to be aware of. And it's not even gaming the system necessarily, it's just using common sense. For example, if the Getae up here are coming down south and they're like marching on the people who live in Pulpadeva, and for whatever reason you want to ally with the Getae, that's when you join their war in attacking the people in Pulpadeva, right? It makes sense. You just need to think logically about that and just keep tabs basically on all the factions around you and their diplomacy status with each other. It will help you out a lot in the long run. And just keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to get alliances with these factions. The main thing you need to do as a one-hitter quitter is just have them not attack you while you're busy attacking others. For example, if you come down and attack Anthea, that's a perfect time for the Getae to come across the Danube and attack Odessos, because you won't have a garrison here. You could have a tiny little pathetic 11 strong garrison. That's disgusting. It's gonna do nothing for you. Your garrisons suck as any barbarian faction usually. So how do you deal with that? You get a non-aggression pact with them. A non-aggression pact is not a guarantee that they won't declare war on you, but it should mean that they won't declare war on you, at least not straight away. All you need is a few turns of peace with you and another faction, and that buys you enough time to take on whatever you need to in the meantime. But that, in my opinion, is going to be one of the biggest challenges for the Odrysians in the early game, is managing your diplomacy, because not a lot of people do like you, and the ones that do are basically just getting in your way anyway. So it could be a little bit frustrating, but it could also mean that you have a few different ways in how you can approach things. For example, maybe you don't want to take all of Thrace. Instead of taking all of Thrace here, you just immediately go north and start attacking the Dacians. Maybe you want to do that and you get alliances with all the people living down here in Thrace. You might, it's up to you. You can play however you like. You don't even need to keep Odessos. I'd recommend you do, but you don't have to. You could do a migration, come over here to the northern side of the Black Sea, take on the Archbosporus Kingdom, get yourself a very beautiful capital. They have a very nice city right up here. It's excellent capital position. Go take that. You have an easy campaign for the rest of the game. It's up to you. But yeah, diplomacy is not going to be as clear cut as it is for most factions, which is interesting, and I kind of like it actually. So then the next thing we need to talk about is your economy. Your economy is basically pretty mid-tier for a barbarian. You do start off with the trained slave resource, so that's nice. You do have silver and lead to your west, which is over here, which is not too far away. It's definitely tangible that you'll get it. However, that's kind of it. There isn't really any other resources until you get down into Greece, or until you circle all the way up around into the Black Sea on the north side, where you have some copper and I think some wine over here or here. It's one of those cities. There is some resources deep in the Dacian heartland, but it's going to be a bit of a pain for you to go towards, and I wouldn't recommend you do it too quickly. So your economy, it's kind of mixed because you're a barbarian, so automatically it means you're generally going to make less money than civilized factions. However, you do have some basic resources very close to you, so that will help. And then you're also a coastal settlement at turn 1, so that's very nice. And it means that you can get trade with pretty much anybody else who has a port city themselves. So you might want to send out a general on a ship early on, start cruising down into the Mediterranean, get some trade with the Egyptians or Romans, whoever, Carthage, it doesn't matter. But yeah, don't be afraid to kind of use the fact that you have a port settlement. You are here to trade with people. At least that is the idea behind it. Beyond that, I don't really have any other recommendations for an economy. That, again, kind of like diplomacy, warrants a video in itself as basically a broad overview for economics. So if you guys would like some help with your diplomacy tactics or your economy decisions, feel free to comment down below, and I'll definitely consider making maybe some guides or something on the topics. And then the next big thing we have to talk about is, of course, your population. One of the most amazing things DAI adds to the game is population mechanics, and the Odrysians are basically in the same boat as most barbarians. They have the, let's look here, they have 35,000 people here at turn 1, and they have the elites, the warriors, the freemen, and the foreigners. Fairly standard, nothing too special. They have a decent mixture of all of these population numbers at turn 1, so that's nice. I haven't ended any turns, by the way. This is how the game looks when you start it up. The elites are at 1,500, so it's not a lot, but it's enough, because you're not going to have many elite units. The warriors class is actually pretty good at 4,500, so that's at least 2 stacks worth of good warrior class units. For example, you could get a lot of the Rumfire Thracian warriors, which is an absolute must-have unit for your armies. They're fantastic, heavy on the charge, and they will kill a lot of the enemy. They won't just scare the crap out of them, they will slaughter them, even very heavily armored opponents. And they come from your warrior social class, so it's not too bad. It's actually looking quite good. And the one extra thing to add is that once you start conquering people near you, a lot of the people near you share the Dacian Thracian culture, which is your culture, by the way. Dacia and Thracia is not separate. It's actually listed as Daco-Thracian. But yeah, you share that culture with the Dacians, so you could go and attack the Kitae to your north, and they have the same culture as you, so assuming you don't massacre the population and you actually occupy it relatively peacefully, that means that you should have a large pool of manpower to draw on from. So that's going to help you out in your early to mid game conquest. In the late game, as you start taking on more civilized factions, it might be a little bit more difficult, especially if you go to the east, but by that point you should be big enough to where it isn't too much of an issue. So early on, your population's looking okay. It's kind of has some mixed points about it. And then last couple closing points. This is your king Odoros. Otto. We'll call him Otto just because I can't pronounce it. He's 36 years old, so he's not too old, but he's kind of getting there. You might want to get him married as soon as you can. Generally, that's what you want to do on turn 1 anyway. Most kings or rulers don't have any wives at the beginning of the game for whatever reason, so you might want to wife him up as quick as you can. But the main thing I wanted to show you is politics. You have the chiefdom government type, which means you have +1 XP rank for all recruit units, which is actually very nice. It makes a big difference for your armies. Extra tax rate, but then your armies cost more, and you have the whopping -5 loyalty for all political parties, which isn't too terrible. However, combining that with that faction buff, or debuff I should say, where you're already having loyalty issues, that does sting a little bit. However, there's actually absolutely nothing you can do about it. All you have next to Empire is the Tribal Confederation, which gives you a whopping -10 loyalty for all political parties. That is really savage and very harsh. It sucks that you can't do any type of government. I really don't like that. I really wish, I'm not sure if it's DI thing or a Rome 2 thing, that these factions have certain government types, but I would like to see certain requirements be met, and then you can unlock something. For example, a small little petty tribe growing large enough to the point where they're a large kingdom. That would be really sick in my opinion. I would absolutely love that. We don't have that here though, and we do have the Empire thing, which is kind of weird that you go from being a chief to being an emperor, but okay, I'll take it. But yeah, basically you're going to want to upgrade to Empire to get rid of that party loyalty if you're having loyalty issues. If you're not having loyalty issues, then it's up to you if you want to upgrade or not. Again, that's also kind of a subject that warrants its own entire video dedicated to it, because there's so many pros and cons to going to each different type of government. But just be wary, you might have some loyalty issues. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the campaign overview. So now, let's go to the part 2 section of this video where we'll check out the military of the Odrysians. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part 2 section of this video. Let's talk about the Odrysian military. Now, unfortunately, once again, we have to say goodbye to the navy of the faction. I thought the Odrysians would have a much better navy than what I actually found, because they are, you know, part of the Pirates DLC and all of that. But I guess that honor more so belongs to the RDI perhaps, because the Odrysians are really lacking in their navy actually. They only have one type of skirmisher naval ship, which is a javelin ship. And then they have 4 types of melee naval ships. However, all of them are basically just axemen on larger or different sizes of ships. That's basically it. It's really disappointing. I hope to see that overhauled in the future, but unfortunately it's just not worth taking a lot of time to show you on this video. So that's just how it is, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll see some improvements to the navy in the future perhaps. But anyway, now let's get on with the land units of the Odrysians. And here we are with your 1 cavalry general you get access to. You have 3 possible personal bodyguards. It's this unit, a hoplite unit, or a late run fire shock warrior unit. These guys are your Thracian noble cavalry. I'll keep the unit cards open on the bottom, by the way. It was personally requested by me to do so by some channel supporters, so thank you guys for the suggestion. If you'd rather see the unit card away, let me know as well down below. Always open to feedback, guys. But anyway, let's at least turn the map off for now, because that's not really needed. And we'll keep open the stats here just for a little bit. So this is your Thracian noble cavalry. It's basically the best cav unit you get access to. I mean, it depends on what you want it for. This cav unit is definitely focused heavily on using long melee engagements to get it to win. It is not a shock cav unit, but it can of course be used as such. Has a lot of armor, as you can see with that scale armor there. It's very full, very nice. An armor 41, which is pretty massive. Definitely very nice. I'm not going to go over all of its single statistics. It's just not needed. It is just a very good melee cavalry unit. And they also do have 1 javelin, so that will help them out. And they're fairly fast at a speed of 6. But anyway, that's your general's bodyguard unit. We have quite a few units to get through, as you can see. So let's get onto your skirmishers and get going. So first up we have your Thracian archers, and despite these guys actually looking like they're hiding here, they're not. They're not hidden at all, so do keep that in mind. These guys are pretty basic. They just hide and scrub in forests, nothing special. No special melee statistics, the most basic bottom tier archer there is really. But then we move up to your Thracian slingers. We're seeing basically the same kind of deal here. A range of 165, so they're very low tier slingers, only a missile damage of 9. I honestly wouldn't bother using these guys at all. They're really terrible. One of the worst slingers I've ever seen actually. Just really, really poor form. It does look like they have shields though, so maybe that will help. Let's look at their melee defense. Total of 6, with 4 of it coming from the shield, but they only have 1 armor, so I mean, I don't think that shield is going to have much effect at all in the actual skirmish against other slingers, but I'm sure other people might think otherwise, but I don't. I just don't think that's good enough. It's pretty pathetic. However, then we move on to your javelin, and we have 3 units of javelin. First off, your most bottom tier one, Thracian javelin. These guys are pretty standard for a javelin unit. However, there's one big thing that you will notice if you pay attention to the statistics screen on the left. They have a big weapon damage. A weapon damage of 21, a charge bonus of 21, and a melee armor piercing damage of 7, giving a total weapon damage of 28. That's actually quite impressive for a skirmisher unit. So basically, these guys are used for using all of the javelins, and they're recharging heavily armored units. They have a melee attack of 9, which is very respectable, only though a melee defense of 2, no shield and no armor. So we're starting to see the trend though for the Odrysians, very focused on shock and armor piercing, one of the best factions for it, and we'll see why shortly. But let's continue up the skirmisher line. We have the Thracian Pelters, like this bloke was just yelling. These guys are basically a step up from the javelin men in every single possible way. Even 1 more damage at 22 compared to 1, range of 90. But we're seeing those very good melee stats. A melee attack of 11, which is very impressive for a skirmisher. Melee defense of just 9, charge bonus of 22, weapon damage of 23, and 7 armor piercing, giving a total of 30 total weapon damage. Very impressive, and this is just a Thracian Peltist unit. Fairly standard, nothing special, except for those very sexy melee statistics. However, it doesn't stop there. We keep going. That's right, the armor piercing train does not stop here with the Odrysians. We then have the Thracian Noble Peltist. Now these guys are where it's getting very serious, and these guys learn a lot from the Greeks in terms of their equipment. They have good shields, good armor at 25, a melee attack of 13, a melee defense of 11, charge bonus of 24, total weapon damage of 32, which is very nice. So wow, these guys are very impressive. Let them use all of their javelins. They have, how much is their ammunition? 7 javelins is what they should have. Excellent unit, very helpful. Definitely can use them in basically any kind of army. I could see them being very useful for sieges, by the way. When you want them to throw all of their javelins in like a street alley or something before they engage, it could be very useful. But wow, just such a powerful unit. So skirmishing department, you still kind of suck, but you have very good melee options from your skirmishers, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. But anyway, now it's time to get to your melee warriors, which you can see you have quite a few of. So we start off with the Thracian levies. Almost nothing to say, except again we do see that armor penetration come back with a whopping AP of 15 with a regular weapon damage of 14. That's giving us a total of 29 weapon damage for your most bottom tier melee unit. 300 men, only attack at 5, so they're pathetic. I wouldn't use them if I could avoid it, but that armor piercing damage though is very sexy, and we'll see that continue its trend through all of your other units. You then upgrade to your Thracian footmen. Basically the same deal here, although their armor piercing is not as strong at just 7, but they have weapon damage at 21, so it's still very impressive. 300 men, attack of 9, so it's a little bit more respectable. This is the kind of unit that you're going to use in your very early tier armies. It'll form a main first battle line for you. Just don't rely on it to hold the battle line. They only have an armor of 8, so they're not all that good really, but they could be useful. Then we move on to your serious shock troops, and we have the Thracian Rumfire Warriors. One of the most cost-effective shock warriors in the game. They do come from your warrior social class, so be a little bit candid with that. But wow, melee attack of 15, charge bonus of 33, are you freaking kidding me? Weapon damage of 25 plus an armor piercing damage of 11, giving us a total weapon damage of 36. These guys are literally trained killers. They will annihilate even the most armored of troops, as long as they get a good charge on them, especially from behind. If they're charging in front of, like, say, a pike wall or a hoplite phalanx, they'll still do okay, but the pikes will kill them, and the hoplites will last still for quite a while with them due to their massive melee defense with their big shields, so do be careful of that. They're not invincible, and they do need to be used appropriately. You can't just send them into a battle and hope for the best, and they have a very low melee defense of 6 and an armor of only 10, which is really pathetic. These guys will get annihilated by skirmishes, so give them some cover at the very least. But then we move on back to kind of more mainline units. We have the Thracian Furios Infantry. Now, your reforms are based on the Greek reforms, so we're going to be seeing some more Greek units here besides the Peltas. These guys are very, very basic. Not terrible. You could use these guys as a main frontline unit for you, but they're not going to last a massive amount of time. An armor of 20, melee defense of 9, and attack of 10. But again, we see that good weapon damage of 21 weapon damage plus an armor piercing damage of 7. So it's definitely nothing to scoff at. These are one of the few Furio sword infantry that I would be excited to use. I almost never use Furio swords. I usually only use the Furio spears. This would easily be one of the exceptions I would make. Pretty solid unit, 300 men. Why not chuck them in? See what you can do with them. I just wouldn't count on them to hold a main battle line for a long time, even though they're 300 men. That kind of low defense is not ideal for a solid main battle line for yourself. After this, we then upgrade to the Tribali Infantry. We have a melee attack of 13 and a defense of 11. Charge bonus goes down a little at 19, but then you have a total weapon damage of 30, although most of it comes just from regular weapon damage, not armor piercing. And then they have an armor of 25, so these guys could definitely be main battle line holders for you. I'm not really sure why you would use these guys instead of using some good shock troops, though. Because, I mean, you always want to have armor piercing damage. Even the low tier barbarian factions that don't have many armored units that you will fight against will use armored units because they can afford to. The AI gets buffs. They can afford to use their elite units as main battle line units, and you will see it as you begin to expand. So they're a pretty solid unit. It's just, I'm not sure if you want to sacrifice losing all of that good armor piercing damage for a unit like this. You might, it just depends on the circumstances, so do keep that in mind. Then we jump up to the Thracian Thorax Infantry. Again, you're based on the Greek reforms, so you get the Thorax Infantry. Fantastic stats pretty much all the way around, and the one special thing about this Thorax unit is that again we see the massive weapon damage. A regular weapon damage at 25 plus 7 armor piercing, giving you a total of 32 damage. These guys are impressive, very, very impressive. If you can get a whole main battle line of these, do it. It'll be expensive, but it will be massively worth your time. They will get some serious kills against most units. An armor 38 as well, even a bonus versus elephants, because why not? And they have a javelin to throw. Very nice. The only thing missing that would make them perfect is no formation attack, no discipline formation or shield wall or anything. If they had that, then they would basically be god tier Roman legionaries, but they're not, so it's a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. We then go back to the shock department though with the D Folksmen. Now these guys are kind of a step up from that first run fire unit we saw. Even though they don't have the highest stats necessarily, they do have a much higher armor than the last run fire warriors we looked at, so that's why I put them up here to be a little bit higher. Melee attack of 13, defensive 10, which is pretty good for a shock unit. Weapon damage of 25 plus 7, armor piercing again, charge bonus of 24, and an armor of 28. This is a very good shock infantry unit. It's not your best, but if you do want to use these guys because of their higher melee defense, their armor, I mean, there's a few different reasons that you would use them. But do keep in mind they only have 200 men in their unit, but so does most of your other units that we've seen, at least the good, solid mid-tier ones. But anyway, that's it for your D Folksmen. Now we get up to the serious killers. These guys are where we're starting to get to the best of the best. And I don't mean just for your roster, I mean for the entire freaking mod. The late run fire warriors of the Odrysian kingdom, the noble late run fire warriors. In addition to the late run fires, both of these units right here made it to our top shock infantry video. The noble run fire warriors, by the way, spoiler alert if you haven't watched it, but if you haven't, I'd recommend you go watch it. But spoiler alert if you haven't and don't want to, these guys made it into the number 2 slot, the second best and arguably the best in DEI. So we'll talk about them in a second, but first we have the Thracian late run fire warriors. These guys were in that video. They weren't in the top 3 or anything though, but they were still a fantastic freaking unit. Melee attack of 17. That is absurd, disgusting. A charge bonus of 36 like they're a cavalry unit. Weapon damage of 25 and an armor piercing of 13. What in the actual titties is that? That is a disgusting weapon damage. Getting you all the way up to a weapon damage of 38. That's not human. That's disgusting. An armor of 38 as well, so these guys will last for quite a while in combat. However, their biggest letdown is easily the melee defense of only 7, which isn't too terrible, but these guys are your elites. Not even the best of your elites, but they're elite, and that means that they will get ground down over time if they go up against very good holding units, such as elite hoplites. They'll probably beat the hoplites, but they'll take some serious casualties if it's a frontal on charge when the hoplites are in a good position. And pikemen, of course, like any other melee unit, these guys will struggle to take them on when fighting from the front. I wouldn't fight pikes at all, ever from the front. But then, oh, ladies and gentlemen, holy shit, we get to the drumroll, to the grand finale of the Odrysian melee units, and that is the Thracian noble run-fire men, or the Thracian noble run-fire warriors. So these guys are a step up compared to that last run-fire warrior unit we saw for a couple reasons. One, the visuals. Wow. These guys are basically just barbarian-looking superheroes all around. That's absolutely incredible. Do keep in mind these units do have only 200 men, as do most of your units, by the way. But it's just something I'm throwing at you. But what is the difference between this unit and the last late run fire warriors we just checked out? Well, the main thing is just a couple of different changes. First off, the attack. The nobles have an 18 melee attack versus the 17 of the late run fires. But that means that they only have a melee defense of 6 compared to 7. Little difference, but it could make a lot of difference, who knows. The next thing that we have is the charge bonus. The charge bonus of the nobles is at 38 compared to 36. Not a big difference, but again, maybe it's a tiny little difference that makes all the difference for you. And then the next change, though, is actually a little bit more important. 49 base morale versus 52. 52, that is very, very powerful. That's absurd. It's very, very nice. These guys will probably fight to almost the last man, even though they will die quicker because of their very low melee defense at only 6. It's really pathetic. And do keep in mind that this is one of your 3 General's Bodyguard units, so that is worth remembering. But anyway, time to jump up to your spearmen now, ladies and gentlemen. We have the Thracian Light Spearmen. Nothing really worthy of note to say. Basically bottom tier spears, 300 men in the unit. Don't use them if you can avoid them. Then we get to the Thracian spears, the last unit being the Thracian light spears. This is just the regular spears. The stats are just slightly higher in every sense of the word. Still not really worth using if you can avoid it. Very low tier unit. The only nice thing about it is its melee defense is at a whopping 16, which is actually quite high. But their armor is at 8. Melee attack is 7, very low. Basically across the board there. And then now that we've covered the 2 plebe spearmen that you get access to, we then move on to the Thracian Furio spears. Furio spears in general are pretty much all the same regardless of what faction you're checking out. And it's basically the same kind of story here. 300 men per unit. Decent stats all around. Fairly lightly armored though at just 15. Don't let these massive shields fool you. They don't really have much armor. But they do have a solid melee defense of 17. So if you really want, you could have these guys try to plug up holes in your main battle line. But as always, the main idea behind Furio spears is to use them as cavalry support. And they're quite fast and they have a lot of men. So they should be able to really help your cav get the upper hand, which they'll need all the help they can get. But that's it for your plebby spear units, at least just spear units. Oh no, actually we have one more, and then we get into more specialized, such as your hoplites and such. So we go from Furios, then we go all the way up to the Thracian 4X Spearmen, as usual again for the 4X troops. Highly equipped, highly well trained, just excellent units all around. Nothing really specific to say about them that I haven't said 100 times already about 4X Spearmen. Excellent unit, very mobile, not as mobile as the Thurio Spears though, because they do have the heavy armor weighing them down. But they're just very elite and very good. But, I mean, you might want to consider, is it really worth using a 4X Spearman when you could use a cheaper Thurio Spearman? It's really up to you and how you want to use them. But to be honest, if I'm trying to use these two spears right here as cavalry support, the main thing I'm going to want to do is have mobility. And so the Thurios do have that edge over the 4X swords, so over the 4X spears, sorry. So you might want to use the Thurios instead. But then the 4X can also be more useful against other infantry, so it's a bit of a toss-up, depends on your style. But now we're done with just the basic kind of typical spearmen, and now we get to the special units, and this is really nice for the Odrysians because you get a lot of options with just these three units right here. They give you a very, very nice amount of options. First up, we have the Thracian medium pikemen. These guys are basically a core pikeman unit. They have a typical long sarissa. They have some decent armor at 20, melee attack of 9, defense of 12. They don't have any armor piercing, so they are a true pikeman unit. It's not like the Thracian hybrid where they're using axes or something on the side. It's not like that at all. They're quite slow, but of course they have the pike phalanx option, and they have 256 men in their unit, which is very wide. Like, look how wide this unit right here is stretched out as far as it can be, and that's very, very solid. All you need is like 3, maybe 4 of these, and you can offer a very good solid line of defense for your main battle lines. But then we also have another pikeman unit. They upgrade to the Thracian. I'm gonna try to get this right. If Icaratian pikeman, yeah, okay. The Iffies, the Thracian Iffy pikeman. These guys are very good. Although you will notice, just visually, there's a massive difference in length. The basic pikemen have a typical sarissa. These guys use a much shorter pike. Does it have that much of an effect? Yeah, I think it does have an effect, but it's not going to be overly negative, and you probably won't notice too much of a difference unless you put these guys up against other pikemen where they literally won't be able to reach the other pikes. But if you're just going up against any kind of typical melee unit, these guys should do fine. They have fantastic stats across the board with a melee attack of 15, which is very, very high for a pike unit. They even have a decent charge bonus at 24, good weapon damage overall at 30, and armor at 28, which is super solid. They have bonuses versus cav of 8 and elephants of 25, so very good at dealing with elephants and cav if you can get them close enough. And they do have the hoplite phalanx formation, not the pike formation, but a hoplite formation, which is basically the same thing anyway. Just, yeah, very good pike unit, but again, they might get outclassed if they go up against other just basic mid-tier sarissa wielding pikes, at least longer sarissa wielding pikes. Because you can see right there, it's quite a reach difference. I'm trying to get it like side by side. There we go. So that pikeman's down here. It's almost, I would say it's about 2/3 of the length of the typical sarissa. So do be aware of that. But they are excellent elite, well, not elite, but they're basically an elite tier spearman unit for you. So yeah, very, very good unit overall though. And then you get the typical Thracian hoplites. How cool is that? Even though you're a barbarian faction, you are learning a lot from your Greek neighbors, and this is also included in it. These are very much so more of an elite tier hoplite, or at least a high tier hoplite, maybe not elite, although they might be considered elite because you are barbarian really. They have a massive armor of 38, which is a whopper, an attack of 7, which is a bit of a letdown, defensive 16, which is solid though. They even have a decent weapon damage at 26 in total. Yeah, just overall, very, very solid hoplite unit. Could give you a very good main battle line to hold against enemy attacks, especially against skirmishers. These guys will tank a lot of skirmish fire from the front. Just don't let them get hit behind or from the side. But from the front, these guys will hold down basically any kind of wave of attackers coming straight at you, as long as it's frontal. So if you like, these 3 units give you the option to basically create a Hellenic style army, and then you have the Hellenic units of like the Furios swordsmen and the Furios peltist. I mean, not the Furios, just the Greek peltist style units you get access to. Overall, you can have a lot of different types of armies. You can go Greek or Thracian, and then it goes into subcategories. Do you want a rush army? Do you want a hammer and anvil army? Do you want just a pure defensive army? A lot of different options just based on having just these few extra units added to the roster. And that's why I'm always in favor of having more units and more content in general for any faction. But now it's been a while, so it's time to finish things up. Let's get through the cav and then we're on to the verdict. So here is our Thracian Lancer Cavalry, pure shot cav unit, hence why they have Lancer in the name. Incredibly bad defense, only at 4, so do not let them get stuck at all in a prolonged melee. They will get demolished. They also only have an armor of 11, but then they have good weapon damage of 33 in total, charge bonus of 62, which is pretty massive, considering these are just a like shot cav unit. And they're super fast with a good speed of 8. Very, very useful cavalry unit. Just be careful. They're kind of like glass cannons, so you don't want them to take any kind of damage whatsoever. Then we have the Thracian Thorax Cavalry. Jump straight to Thorax. There isn't any Furios for some reason. You do have different types of cavalry though, but they're skirmisher cav. Thracian Thorax Cav are basically your dedicated melee cavalry unit, besides your general, of course, which is your Thracian Noble Cav. Your Thracian Thorax Cavalry are basically the same as your general, just slightly lower in terms of morale, and they're faster, just barely. So yeah, fantastic melee cav unit though. Definitely try to use them in the late game against the other factions using elite cav, especially the Scythians. You'll need quality to defeat their quantity. They have a lot of numbers. But yeah, it's basically the same as your general's bodyguard, just slightly better and worse in just 2 instances. So that's it. For your melee cav, you're very limited in your cavalry options, so you're going to be wanting to get some AUR merc units to back that up. But then we move on to your skirmisher cavalry. Now let's start, I believe this is the bottom tier unit down here. Yeah. Okay, so down here we have your Thracian javelin cav. 120 men in the unit, so that's nice, but besides that, they don't really have too much to say. Melee stats are pretty poor. Weapon damage is okay at 33 in total though, so you could get these guys into a melee, but it's just so light, so lightly armored, they will get demolished very quickly. I wouldn't count on them to do too very well in melee. But then we jump up to the Thracian Cavalry. Now these guys are super armored at 31. Look at that chainmail, oh my goodness. These guys are starting to look like the median cataphracts with all that gold chainmail style. Or scale armor, I think that's called actually. Pretty sure, but anyway. These guys are skirmishers at heart, but they do have the capability to do well in melee. They do only have an attack of 8 and a defense of 7, so it's pretty low, but that high armor will keep them going in combat for quite a while. And of course they have a base morale of 46, which is actually very, very good. So basically a high tier skirmisher cav unit that lets you do melee stuff and shock kind of stuff, because they do have a decent charge bonus at 44, so you can charge them into the rear of enemy formations. But at the end of the day, they're just a versatile cav unit you get access to. So definitely not bad. Want to try and use them, but they're not vital to your armies. We then jump up though to the Thracian medium cavalry. Now these guys are very similar in stats, but I would say the Thracian medium cav comes out on top. They basically are just ahead of the Thracian cav in almost every single way except charge. Yeah, the main difference is the charge there. The Thracian cavalry have much better charge, whereas these guys have a lower one at 36, which isn't terrible still. Good weapon damage of 34 in total, armor of 31 again though. Good speed at a high 8, missile damage 22, melee attack of 11, and a defense of 10. Now these guys, they're basically the best skirmisher cav that you get access to. as part of your core roster. Very, very useful, very fast as well. So I think this is the cav unit that you're going to want to give you more versatility in your armies. That should be a little bit more flexible in dealing with enemy cavalry contingents. And yeah, that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. You're kind of lacking in the cav department, but you do cover the basics with a melee unit, shock unit, and then some skirmisher options that are versatile. So it's not too terrible. Overall, it's pretty obvious that the main thing that you're lacking in your army is skirmishers. Despite having 5 units of skirmishers, they're all not very good at actually skirmishing. So if you go up against a specialized faction that has good archers or whatever, like the Getae, you might want to focus on bringing some rush armies to negate that advantage. That, or just, of course, as always, AOR and mercenary units can help you out. But anyway, now let's quickly jump into the verdict section of this video. It'll only be very quick as we are starting to get a little bit shorter time. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the part 3 section of this video. We'll talk about the verdict of the Odrysian Kingdom. Now, of course, it has to be stated that you are a one-hitter quitter, and so the main issue with this campaign is that you're going to have a very dicey start. It's going to be very volatile. It can change very quickly. One moment you could be doing fine, attacking a neighbor and taking some easy territory, and the next you might have 3 or 4 war declarations because you don't really have anyone that's an obvious ally. So my advice is to either hit everybody you want to within the first 5 to 8 turns roughly, and then just kind of sit and wait, or wait until about 15 turns have passed. That way you have enough time to build 1, maybe 2 armies, and all of your neighbors should already be at war with each other, and then you'll be able to pick them off a bit easier. And that's usually the easier option, is to just try and wait it out, play a little bit tall, and see what your neighbors are going to do. Hopefully they don't team up against you, but that's just RNG at the end of the day. I think this is one of the few campaigns where fighting the Greeks is actually going to be very hard for you, because their hoplites and pikes present a very solid wall even against your high tier shock units. So you're really going to have to focus on either ambushing them or just outflanking them completely, which isn't hard to do against the AI, but attacking from the front against hoplites is kind of doable for you, but against pikemen, that's where you're going to suffer, and most of the Greek factions around you will be using pikemen. So it's going to be interesting to see what your thoughts are down below on how you think the Thracians go up against other factions. I think fighting Rome will actually be kind of easy, because they don't have that melee unit that keeps units at a distance like the pikes. They just have sword units, really. So even though they're heavily armored, that's exactly what your units can charge into and demolish. Additionally, the Greeks also have better navies than you very, very easily. Your navy situation is really bad. It's kind of surprising, considering I usually associated the Odrysians as a pirate faction, but maybe that's more of a vanilla Rome 2 thing. And DEI, the navy is pretty terrible. Like I said, only 5 units in total, 4 of which are just the same kind of melee unit on a different size ship. So that's really poor. I was really surprised about that. Hopefully it gets changed in the future. And then of course you do need to remember the nomads to your north present a possible challenge for you if you don't get yourself a lot of cavalry to counter them. I wouldn't even bother trying to use your slingers on them. Just get cav. They'll chase them down, push them up against the edge of the map or against cliffs or whatever, and then you can bring in your fast moving spearmen and such and annihilate their heavy cav armies. But you will need a good amount of cavalry to take them on. I'd say at least 6 units of cav per army to take on the Scythians to your north. And before we give the difficulty rating, I will just state, for the reforms of the Odrysians, they are based entirely on the Greek reforms. So that means that you get the Furios reforms at turn 60 and the Thorax reforms at turn 140, which isn't too bad. Overall, maybe the Thorax reforms could be a little bit earlier. That'd be nice, but at the end of the day, you're not going to have to rely on those reforms to get you winning lots of battles. You're just going to have to rely on your run-fire warriors to annihilate the enemy from behind, and your fast-moving spearmen and whatnot. But anyway, so what does this lead to in terms of difficulty? Well, overall, I think it's a very dicey campaign. Nothing is set in stone for you at all. You could be getting attacked from any direction, including the sea. So, in my opinion, this is actually quite a hard campaign, and I'm giving it a solid 7 out of 10. This is a hard campaign overall. You do have some good advantages, and you can abuse the AI to make it easier. But as always, this faction overview is tailored towards casual players like myself who might not be the most skilled, or at least not know all that much about the game or how to game the AI, or just don't want to game the AI and get advantages that way. So in my opinion, for the standard kind of casual DEI player, this is going to be a hard campaign for you. But really just kind of depends on the randomness of your neighbors and what they're going to do. If they all team up on you early on, this could easily turn into an 8 or 9 out of 10. If some of them attack you and some don't, it's a 7. If they all just end up fighting each other and you come in and swoop on their cities while they're weak, then it makes it much easier and getting to like a 5 out of 10, maybe a 4 out of 10. But the one nice thing though about this is that in your late game fighting Rome shouldn't be impossible for you. You can use your hoplites and pikemen to hold them in position, smash them with your shock cav or your shock infantry, and you'll get some very good results that way. So that's nice, and it's not really often you can say, I think this faction would do good against Rome. That is really a rare statement in Rome too. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to say about the Odrysian Kingdom. Let me know your thoughts down below on what you think of the faction, and also please give me some suggestions on factions you'd like to see done. I am trying to wait until the next DEI patch comes out to start on certain factions like the Greek colonies and stuff, so that's why I'm purposely avoiding some of them. So if you could give me any suggestions though, I would love to take them into consideration. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.